To SUNY Poly's Veterans Day ceremony. Thank you all for coming to our annual event. If you please join me in the national anthem, would you please stand? Presenting the colors are the NJROTC from Proctor High School.
Up, stand. Up. Forward. Arch. Colors. Hold. Left. Face. Pause interval. Thrust right. Thrust. Ready. Front. Carry. Colors. Ready. Cut. Present. Colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Color. Carry. Colors. Order. Colors. Ready. Cut. Right. Face. Forward. Arch.
Please be seated. Thank you to Proctor High School, our future veterans. May I have a moment of silence, please, to remember those that have fallen and those that are still serving in the military. When Francis Scott Key wrote The Star-Spangled Banner almost 200 years ago, he called America the land of the free and the home of the brave. Those words are as true today as they were then. Throughout this nation's history, America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen have bravely answered the call to defend our freedom, to aid our friends, allies, and turn back aggressors. We can never fully repay our debt of gratitude to the more than 650,000 American service members who died in battle, or the 1.4 million who were wounded. We can, however, recognize and thank the 25 million veterans still living today. These words are inscribed on the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met. Those words apply equally to many of our World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, Iraq War, and Afghanistan War. They apply to today's active duty service members and tomorrow's veterans who are helping to maintain peace throughout the world. Today it is our privilege to say thank you to all of Americans' veterans, to let them know that we appreciate them for their service and honor them for their sacrifices. The price of freedom is high. We cannot afford to forget those willing to pay for it. Today we celebrate America's veterans for keeping this nation the land of the free and the home of the brave. Once again, I thank you all for being here. Right now, I would like to have Dr. Joe come up and introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Patrick Welch. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Patrick Welch. Dr. Patrick Welch is a retired veteran from the Marines. Yay, Marines. He was actually involved in Vietnam as an infantry squad leader. He is the recipient of the Purple Heart, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Good Conduct Ribbon, the National Defense, the Vietnam Campaign, the Vietnam Service, and New York State Conspicuous Service Cross. He is also in the Hall of Fame at the New York State Senate for Veterans, and he has served veterans in a number of different capacities. His latest capacity was the director for the Center of Veterans and Family Services, an adjunct professor for social work at Damien College. He also served as the director for the Veterans Service Agency for Erie County in Buffalo, New York. So it's my great pleasure to ask Dr. Patrick Welch to join us. I think he'll have some very interesting comments to make.
Morning. That was pathetic, folks. I need to know that you've got blood flowing through your veins and you've got a set of vocal cords. You're going to be with me for a little while this morning, so let's try that again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. That wasn't so hard, was it? Thank you, Steve Darman, and thank you, Dr. Joe, for inviting me here today. Who are my veterans? Please stand. Don't sit down. Don't sit down. Okay. I'll tell you when you can take your seat. All right. I am always humbled in the presence of greatness. And whenever I am in the company of my fellow veterans, greatness is all around me. It is because of you and those who preceded you and those that are now serving that we have the privilege of living in the United States of America and enjoying all the freedoms that go with that. And I want to personally thank each and every one of you and your families for your service to our nation. Seats. Did that ring a bell with you when I said seats? It's a military thing. When you're standing up and who's ever at the podium, when they want you to sit down, they don't say, you may take your seats now. They go, seats, and everybody drops. All right. I want to do a little housekeeping before I get into my words. When I asked Steve and Dr. Joe how long they wanted me to speak, they gave me the approximate time that they wished me to detain all of you this morning. So many times I, like you, have been sitting in the audience and a person has been up there speaking and they just talked on, and you're sitting in the audience going, when is this ever going to end? And it was prefaced by the person getting up there saying, I'm going to be brief in my remarks. And that's the code of death I will be brief. Be prepared for a long stay. So I've got some good news, some bad news, and some good news for you. So the good news, I'm not going to talk as long as they ask me to. The bad news is I will not be brief. And the good news is that as long as you stay with me till the end, we're going to serve you lunch. So all of you students have an opportunity to not go to class because you can get this for extra credit. All right, for all of you who may not know, yesterday was the 239th birthday of the United States Marine Corps. Any Marines here? That's all right, I can take you all. It's an inter-service thing. We always have this rivalry that's going on. Well, we were founded in a bar called Tun Tavern in Philadelphia. And we have been drinking and fighting America's wars for 239 years. So I'll wish myself a happy birthday. All right, I'm going to break this into 3 segments. I'm going to talk a little bit about historical military history, a little bit about personal reflections, and then I'm going to talk about the people I call our newest, greatest generation. If in 1775 the farmers and the shoemakers had not dropped their implements of their trade and taken the muskets off the hearth and gone out to commit treason against Great Britain, we would not all be sitting here. There would be no United States of America. So you have to reflect on the fact that those people committed treason. They fought for 8 years. And after 8 years, when it was all over, America had veterans. So veterans isn't a new term. It's been around since the founding of our country. And over the next 239 years, nearly 48 million men and women have served in the armed forces of this United States, in peace and in war. And there are 1.3 million of them buried in cemeteries all over this world. If you don't know it, we fought our second Revolutionary War in 1812, appropriately called the War of 1812. And right now we are in the midst of celebrating 200 years of peace with our Canadian neighbors. We don't celebrate the war. There's ongoing functions. It started in 1812 all over the country. In fact, my hometown of Buffalo was burned to the ground during the War of 1812. And many segments of Washington, D.C. were burned down. And we had peace for a while, and then came the Civil War. North and South, brother and brother, father and son fighting each other based upon their individual beliefs. And it was the most divisive war in our history. And when it ended, over 600,000 Americans were dead. That was also the time that President Lincoln formed the Veterans Administration to care for him who have borne the battle and his wife, and widow and orphan. The thing I find interesting about this first home is that they put it up in Togus, Maine. Anybody know where Togus, Maine is? It's about the farthest point north in the continental United States. And I find this interesting because what they did was took all the veterans who were maimed in the war and who were delusional and had mental health issues, and they put them as far away from the population as they could get them. Many of them suffering from something called soldier's heart. Anybody know what soldier's heart is called today? Let me hear you. PTSD. PTSD is nothing new. It's just something that was finally, through the clinical people, put in the DSM-3 to give it an actual name. But going back all the way to when the first cavemen started fighting each other, PTSD and traumatic brain injury existed. So all through this time, it mostly had been physical and mental wounds of war. But nobody really understood the mental side of it, and many people will say we still don't understand the mental side of it. After the Civil War, many actions all over the world until the big one came along. Anybody know what the big one was? Don't I have any history, people? Thank you. World War I. Europe in 1914 erupted into fighting all over the continent. It was called the War to End All Wars. I guess we know how that worked out, don't we? U.S. lost 116,000 dead in a little over 1 year of fighting. And a new element was introduced into warfare: chemicals. They used things called mustard gas and sarin. One inhalation of mustard gas and you were dead. That's how potent this drug was. When World War I ended, they called it Armistice Day and declared that the 11th day of the 11th month on the 11th hour would be celebrated. Well, that lasted for a few years, and then came World War II. Germany, Japan, and Italy bent on world domination. America fought in World War II for 4 years, and over 400,000 Americans died in the European theater and in the Pacific theater. Those veterans have been called the greatest generation for their efforts to defeat Nazism, fascism, and the Empire of Japan. During World War II, over 16 million Americans served. And when they came home, they went to school, they got into the trades, and they built the greatest economic and military power the world has ever seen. Then 5 years later, came a dirty little war called Korea. Korean vets call it the Forgotten War, because nobody seems to remember that in 3 years of warfare, over 36,000 Americans died. This war never officially ended. If you're not aware of it, all we have is an armistice between North and South Korea. And since 1953, we've maintained 40,000 troops in South Korea to deter the North Koreans. Then came my war, Vietnam. Up until the new war, we fought the longest, and except for the Civil War, the most divisive war this country has ever had. And it was also the beginning of a new type of warfare, asymmetrical warfare. There were no front lines, there were no rear lines. The battlefield was 360 degrees, and that is what continues to this day. In Vietnam, the first American was killed in 1959. And when we finally left in 1975, over 58,300 Americans would lose their lives. What a lot of people don't realize is that the leader of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, was our ally in World War II. He fought right alongside us with his people and our troops against Japan. And when the war ended, he asked the Western powers for support in their independence from France. And the Western powers sided with France. And then we had the French War in Vietnam, and that laid the groundwork for the Vietnam War. As they call it in Vietnam today, they call it the American War. It also became the first television war. People could come home from work at night, sit down at the dinner table, flip the news on, and they could see the fighting that had gone on that day. Very, very different from World War II. Has anybody ever heard of the village of Cam Nhi in Vietnam? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes. All right. Interesting little story about media operations. On August 3rd, 1965, my unit was involved in an operation to go secure the village of Cam Nhi. Along with us was a CBS reporter named Morley Safer. Anybody ever heard of Morley? Okay. Well, we went into that village, and on our way in there, we were engaged in small arms fire. 2 Marines were wounded. We finally got the order to take the village, and we went in, cleared the village out, found arms caches, found food storage, and so on. Then we were ordered to burn the village down. We didn't have a flamethrower with us, so we had our Zippo lighters. So Morley Safer lined up for a report, and in the background were myself and some of our fellow veterans with our Zippo lighters burning the huts down. And that night on the evening news, Morley Safer did nothing but show us burning the village and saying, "This is what your American Marines are doing in Vietnam." He did not ever report the firefights and the wounded Marines that precipitated that action. That's an example of how the media framed the Vietnam War. We could have a whole course on media and what they do in warfare, but we'll leave that for another point. During that time, war protesters filled the streets almost every day. College campuses were various hotbeds. Those folks that claimed to be peaceniks and were against war stormed college campuses, burned college buildings, bombed government buildings, and engaged in various violent behavior. They were the people that were for peace. So the North Vietnamese watched our television as we fought them on the battlefield and defeated them in every engagement. And when they saw what was going on in America, on our television stations, they said, "We can outlast the politicians in Washington." In fact, one of Ho Chi Minh's greatest statements was that for every 1 American soldier killed, I will lose 10, and it is America that will tire of the war. We did not lose a single battle from 1965 to 1972 when we pulled out of Vietnam. Unfortunately, 3 years later, the South Vietnamese couldn't hold the country, and in 1975, South Vietnam was finally unified as one Vietnam. As we continue to fight the pros and cons of my war, it doesn't ever seem to go away. Many say those 58,300 died in vain, and we never should have been there. We can't rewind the hands of time and bring them back. So we must always go forward and honor their service and sacrifice. I've spent the majority of my adult life wondering why. Why did I survive when those to my left and my right died? And why are the names of so many of my friends engraved on that wall in Washington? None of us will ever know the answer to the first why. But several years ago, I came to peace with my personal answer to the second why. And I'd like to share that with you. Since 1917, the Soviet Union had been the primary exporter of the communist doctrine throughout the world, and country after country succumbed to that doctrine. The Soviet Union supported the North Vietnamese in their war against us. So I suggest to you that the hot war in Vietnam was the precursor to the victory of the Cold War. I've got a Cold War veteran sitting right here, Alan. Thank you for your service. Because after Vietnam, only 2 more countries fell to the communists. And in 1989, the most prominent edifice of communism, the Berlin Wall, came crumbling down, and so did the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Therefore, in my view, those listed on the wall did not die in vain, because they, along with everyone who served, defeated those who wished to destroy the American way of life. So what happened after Vietnam? El Salvador, Beirut, Grenada, Libya, Panama, Gulf War I, Somalia, Haiti, Colombia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and then 9/11, 2001. For the second time in modern history, the American homeland was attacked. Not by a country, but by a group of terrorists who hijacked some airplanes, flew them into buildings, and killed over 3,000 people. So off we went to Afghanistan. We're going to hunt these people down, and we're going to terminate them. 13 years later, we're still there. 2,350 Americans have given their lives, and over 17,700 have been wounded in action, and thousands have returned home with the invisible wounds of war: PTSD, TBI, anxiety, depression, and dependence issues. We then invaded Iraq. 7 years we were there, and when we left, 4,425 Americans were killed in action, and 31,949 were wounded in action. And thousands came home with the invisible wounds of war: PTSD, traumatic brain injury, anxiety, depression, and dependence issues. Why do I pause a little bit when I talk about dependence? For the last year that we have record of, the Department of Defense issued 3.6 million prescriptions of hydrocodone, oxycodone, and fentanyl to the troops while they were downrange to keep them in the fight. Bags of pills. Here you go, soldier. Here you go, Marine. You're having some problems. You can't keep in the fight. We have to keep our unit operational tempo at a certain percentage. And if we drop below that, we're going to be considered a non-combat unit. So let's pump them full of pills to keep them in the fight. I call those who have served in the global war on terror the newest, greatest generation. Our professional military has performed in an outstanding manner over the last 13 years. Multiple deployments. This is unprecedented in our history. You don't go once. You don't go twice. You go maybe 3 times, 4 times, 6 times. You leave families at home, children, wondering if mom or dad are ever going to be coming home again. If you're not aware of it, secondary PTSD in military families is a huge problem. So just who are these people? The newest, greatest generation who serve us today. Well, after Vietnam, the draft was ended. Anybody ever hear of the draft, selective service? Yes, sir. Okay. All of you males 18 years of old registered with the selective service? Yes or no? If you're not, you better get down and register because you're in violation of federal law. Every 18-year-old male in this country must register with the selective service. Now, in today's world of everything being equal, I always ask one question. Why don't you ladies have to register? I heard little laughs. What do you think? Should ladies register too? Yes or no? Yeah, that was kind of a weak yes. All right. But anyhow, that's just my own little thing. All right. We have an all-volunteer army today. Everyone who goes in our services today chooses to be there. Multitude of different reasons why. No jobs, money for education, whatever it may be. We do not lack for people joining the military. In 13 years of war, every branch of the military has met or exceeded their recruiting and their retention goals. They are the best educated military we have ever put out. You cannot get into today's military without a high school education or at least a GED. When I went into the military, I had been kicked out of school when I was 16 years old. Anybody here ever been escorted out of a school and told never to come home? I have. They didn't particularly like me. I was a little bit of a problem in those days. Our senior NCOs have more bachelor's degrees than any time in our history. Our officers have more master's degrees and doctorates than ever in our history. We educate our people. We encourage education. The United States Air Force has got its own community college. When I was at Damon bringing veterans into our school, many of those veterans who were in the Air Force came to my school with an associate's degree already that they had received in the community college of the United States Air Force. Education is a huge part. Many people out there in this country think, oh, it's all the educated boobs who can't do anything who join the military. Not true. We have the best trained military in the world. And I stress the training part because many of the people that we fight do not educate and do not train the conscripts that they bring into their military. Because if they were educated and they were trained, they would pose a problem to those that are in charge. So they keep them illiterate. We train our people for leadership. In our military, if the commanding officer of a unit gets killed, the next person in the chain of command steps in. And if that person goes down, the next person and the next person. Everybody is trained for leadership qualities. We have the best equipped military in the world. Nobody has the things that we have. A lot of people say that's a bad thing. We spend an awful lot of money on military equipment. In my business and military career, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in over 50 countries. Most of those countries do not like us. They would like to see nothing better than the United States become a third world country. They like our money, but if our money no longer is the world standard, they won't be so infatuated with us. There is a changing face of our military. Active duty today is about 15% women. National Guard and Reserve, it's about 20%. Changing face. That's also presented a lot of problems for the VA. The VA has not ever been equipped to take care of women. It's always been a male environment. So they've had to adapt and do things. Our military is the best example of social integration in the world. We take whites, blacks, tans, and yellows. We take Arabs, we take Jews, we take atheists, we take Catholics, Protestants, Baptists. We throw them into this little place called boot camp. And 8 to 12 weeks later, they all come out as a unit. And if you've heard the term band of brothers before, it all starts in boot camp. We come out as Marines or airmen. We don't come out as individuals. We come out with a title that we earned in boot camp. A lot of people say to me, I don't understand why you think veterans are so special. Well, I'm going to give you my example of why I think they're very special. I want you all to think about the last job that you've got. And you're talking with a human resources person. You're getting ready to sign your employment contract or whatever it may be. And one of the documents, the HR person slides across to you and says, Laura, You need to understand, when you sign this document, I own your butt. That gives me the right to send you any place in the world I choose to, at any time that I choose to, for a duration to be determined by me. And by the way, Laura, you may have to die for the company. How many of you are going to take that job? Not too many. Every single one of us who takes the oath of enlistment and signs that contract agrees, if need be, we will give our lives for this country. So if you want to know why veterans are special, that's why, because we'll give our lives for you. These millions of people are both extraordinary and ordinary, and it is both of those qualities that we call our attention to today. In times of peace, as in times of war, our servicemen and women accept a responsibility that goes far beyond the scope of their individual lives. Yet they are also sons and daughters, moms and dads, loved ones, neighbors and friends. Their service is compounded by those who share their lives, the military families. The military families are phenomenal, folks. The men and women who serve this country couldn't do what they do without the support of their husband or wife, or their children, or their moms and dads. And that family serves right along with that veteran. And too often the families are forgotten. So for all you military families that are here today, I want to personally thank you for your service to our nation. We must be grateful for those who have given so much of their personal freedom for the life, for the broad ideal of freedom that is so cherished in our country. And we must be grateful to their families and others who share the many sacrifices such service entails. And we must return to them all the concern and compassion our veterans have shown in the day-to-day experience of life in this nation and for the lives of people all throughout the world. There are many countries in this world that have freedom because of American servicemen and women. Our country is not perfect, folks. I don't want to paint the picture that we know all. We have many, many problems in our country. But when you talk about the beacon of freedom, that is the United States of America. On this Veterans Day, let us recognize the enduring challenge and the special needs that the result comes from military service. Let us commemorate the ultimate sacrifice made by many, and in their honor, affirm our utmost commitment to the principles of the service of our men and women. A little more personal reflection over the last 4 days. I've thought about some things of freedom. And I was recently up at Niagara Community College up in Niagara Falls. Anybody ever hear of that? That's my alma mater. It is the only college that would accept me when I came home from Vietnam. Out of 21 colleges and universities in my area, only one would allow me to come to school when I came home from Vietnam. I was up there visiting some of the veteran students, and they walked me over to the Vietnam Memorial that they had built in honor. One of the names listed on there was Second Lieutenant John Bobo, United States Marine Corps. He was killed in action on 30 March 1967 and posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. I thought of another young man from our general area, Corporal Jason Dunham from Scio, New York. He was killed in action on the 22nd of April 2004 and subsequently posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The thing that's interesting about Jason, he was born on the Marine Corps birthday in 1981. He would have been 33 years old yesterday. I think about the friends that I lost in Vietnam, those I served with, those I went to school with. They finished school, I didn't. And I think about the men I lost in Vietnam, who I think about every single day for the last 49 years. Second Lieutenant Walter Levy and Hospital Corpsman Harold Bird. The day I was wounded, they died, and I survived. And then my dear friend Max Gabriel, United States Navy Brown Water Vietnam veteran. He recently passed away. He suffered from the ravages of Agent Orange over the last 46 years, and it slowly just ate his body up. And he went from a big, gregarious individual who played Santa Claus for many, many years to when I saw him the last day in the hospital bed, he weighed about 110 pounds. Most of us still suffer the physical, mental, and chemical wounds of war. You see, ladies and gentlemen, we can leave the war, but the war doesn't leave us. No matter how hard we may try to put that in the past, the maladies suffered in the time of war stay with us for our entire life. Because no one, absolutely no one, goes to war and ever returns the same person. And there is no group of people that I hold in higher regard than America's veterans. Because of you veterans, we live in the strongest, freest, greatest country in the world. Throughout our history, our country has been blessed to have men and women willing to answer the call to duty and accomplish great things for the benefit of their fellow man. For those of us who survived our wars, it's our responsibility to ensure that all Americans understand the sacrifices made by those who served this country and never forget them. Each year, the population of those who serve in our military goes down. Less than 1% of the population of this country serves in the military and defends your freedom. Even though many Americans may not serve, it's important for you to have some knowledge of those who do serve and have served. The traits that can be learned from veterans: courage, honor, duty, sacrifice, patriotism, heroism, are characteristics that can make us all better citizens. Their everyday acts inspire us to reach beyond our limits. Their losses remind us of a life worthy of living. And through their sacrifice on our behalf, we remember the obligations that we owe. It is a day to share with our children that Veterans Day is more than a day off from school or a department store sale. It is a day to honor the 23 million living veterans who stepped forward, and also to honor their families. It is a day to pay tribute to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And it is a day to remember that there are still 93,300 Americans who went off to war and have never come home. They're called POWs and MIAs. Some of us served long ago, some of us may have just served yesterday. And I pray that the reasons for living are as good as theirs were for serving and dying. May we always remember. May we always be proud. May we always be prepared so that we may always be free. Freedom is not free, ladies and gentlemen, because it has been bought and paid for with the sweat, the tears, the blood, the lives of 1.3 million Americans buried in cemeteries all over this world, and the 93,300 who have yet to come home. God bless all of you, the men and women who serve this country, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you. I was told to open it up for questions, so anybody want to throw any questions at me? No? All right. Come on, come on. Somebody's got to want to ask something. All right, Steve.
Welcome again to SUNY IT or SUNY Poly and campus. Thank you for coming. I know you've done some work with colleges in upstate New York. Can you give us your thoughts about what colleges can do in any way to not just recognize military service and our veterans, but support our veterans both on the college campus and in the community?
Well, I'll start with the colleges. As it said in the introduction, I founded the Center for Veterans and Veteran Family Services at Damon College. And we are listed still today as one of the most veteran-friendly schools in the country. Veteran-friendly schools, it needs more than talking about it. In Vietnam, we had a saying, you know, you talk the talk, but do you walk the walk? And there's a lot of talkers out there who don't know how to walk. It starts with an investment in a veterans advisor on campuses. I've talked to many college presidents. We had 21 up in our particular area, and we had a veterans consortium. And they say, well, we can't afford it. Well, let me be clear. You can't afford not to do it. One of my friends at a private school, and I'll give an example of a private and a public, he's got 450 veterans in his school, times $23,000 a year in tuition. He brings in a significant amount of money for that college. The president of Duville College absolutely loves my friend Ed Randall. That's all federal money coming into that school that they don't have to do anything but certify. Where's my certifier? Out there. Certify attendance, send a bill to the government, and you get a check back. That gives you the ability to use other monies for scholarships and what you may have available for other students who are needy. At the public schools, obviously, the tuition isn't as great, but the return is still there. In fact, when I leave here, I'm going to SUNY New Paltz for two reasons: to visit a friend of mine who is the director of Veteran Services now at SUNY New Paltz, and to visit one of my granddaughters who's a student at New Paltz. And I'm going to take her out because, you know, students are poor, so I'm going to take her out for a couple dinners so she can save her money. And my wife gave me a bag of groceries to bring to her because you all know college students are supposedly the poorest people in the world. But you still get the same return. If you look at that and you bring a veteran in, current tuition here is what, about $6,000? Dr. Gear? Okay, so $7,000 or $8,000 tuition here. That's federal money that can be brought into your school. So if you hired someone to turn around and be the veterans advisor here, take $8,000 and, you know, depending upon what you pay them, the going rate in upstate New York, just so you know, is about $50,000 a year for that job. So I'm just trying to work my way in here, Dr. Gear. All right. So how many students do they have to bring in at $8,000 a year to cover their costs? Not a lot. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is a veterans lounge. It is very important to give these non-traditional students the ability to have a private place to go where they can meet with their fellow vets. Because these non-traditional students coming back may have been out of school for 4 years, 8 years, 10 years or more. So they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're going into classrooms with 18 and 19-year-olds. Whole world of difference. And I'll give you one example. One of my Army vets at my school, 3 tours in Iraq as an Army medic. Army medic is the people who patches everybody up. They get blown apart. The medics put them back together. A lot of blood and guts. He came stomping into my office one day, slammed the door, and said, "I can't take this anymore." And I said, "Frank, what's the problem?" He said, "I just had to sit in a class listening to a 19-year-old co-ed, excuse me, Sister Helen, bitch about getting mud on her Uggs. That was the most important thing in the world today for her. And this guy had spent 3 years in the mud and the blood and everything else." Trivial little things can be a switch in a combat veteran that can tick them off. In my school, I had one of the professors at my school call one of my veteran students a racist. We had a long discussion with that professor. But a lounge gives them the ability to go somewhere and sit down away. Forgive me, all you young folks, I'm not trying to pick on you. But when we come back from war, our mindset is totally different than yours. It's just who we are. So we need a place where we can go and commiserate with our fellow veterans. I had computers in the lounge, we had couches, just gave them a place to go where they could study on their own. So that's another aspect of it. Having a web presence on your web that says veterans as a tab. And when they click it, it talks about, you're a yellow ribbon school, you do this, you do that. Turning around, setting up a Student Veterans of America Association. Right now, Lance is the president of it here. Very important aspect of having a veteran-friendly college. And there's several others, but those are some of the things that need to be done before you can really stand in front of a group of veterans and claim to be a veteran-friendly school. Another question? Has that spurred anybody? Huh? Anybody angry with me making that statement? No? All right. What the hell? Do you think this is the Steve Darman show? This is my show. Sit down.
I had the privilege of meeting you a number of years ago, Patrick. I've since met some new Vietnam vets that are here in this community. As soon as I feel comfortable knowing that they can hear this the right way, I ask them, how is it possible that you're not sitting in a jail cell or a mental hospital or, dead drunk somewhere, and especially you kept your marriage together all these years? How did you stay out of jail or prison and a psych institution?
To find a woman who would put up with me and support me when I got off track. And this month, in fact, in 2 weeks, we will celebrate our 47th wedding anniversary. And the support system is key to the whole thing. When you come back, if you don't have a support mechanism in place, you can wind up in bad places. I've been very, very fortunate in my life to, one of the greatest things I think we've done is to be a part of forming the first Veterans Treatment Court in the United States of America in Buffalo. We have saved over 200 veterans from incarceration or death by getting them into a treatment court. And that's a big thing. I mentioned about the DOD with the bags of pills. I want you to think for a moment, folks. You've been in the military, you've been getting your bag of pills. You now are discharged from the military. You have post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury. So you file a claim with the VA so that you can get compensation for those injuries. With your TBI or with your PTSD, you may not be able to work. You may not be able to hold a job. Memory issues and concentration, things like that can be difficult for someone with TBI. So you can't work. Bless you. All right. Bless you again. All right. You can't work. You're waiting for that claim to be adjudicated. 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. You've got no income. You're addicted to hydrocodone. You may be a couch hopper. Everybody know what a couch hopper is? Someone who's got no permanent residence. I go and John lets me spend a few days at his house. He says, all right, I'm sick of you, get out of here. And I go call Deb and say, Deb, can I spend a couple days at your house? I hop, because I've got no permanent place to go. I've got no money. I can't buy food. I'm waiting for the VA to adjudicate my claim, and I need hydrocodone. What happens to me? I wind up on the streets. Maybe I hook up with a guy and I start dealing for him so that I can get some money coming in. Then I get busted, and then I see him in our veterans court. And we find out that they've been waiting 12 or 18 months, and the VA has still not settled their claim. So we expedite their claim and start getting them some money so they can start to live a life. And then we make sure that they're going to their counseling sessions. And we make sure that they stay clean and sober. And if they do that for 12 consecutive months, then we graduate them and acknowledge the fact that they've gotten their life back. It can be a very dangerous road, particularly with the invisible wounds of war. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, big issue. For the most part, in our country, we're brought up with certain values. And I'm not going to get into religion, but you're brought up to be a good person. Thou shalt not kill. You're brought up in an environment like that where you want to help people, you want to do things. Then you go to boot camp. They train us to do one thing: kill. So if you're in the infantry, in the Army, or in the Marine Corps, that's your job. You are an 18, 19-year-old professional killer. And we in the military do a very, very good job of that. Then you come home. One of the things that's very, very important for a lot of veterans is to always have a weapon with them. Because without that weapon, I feel naked. I feel exposed. I feel vulnerable. So the moral side of it, what I did, is I start to get into treatment, and I start talking about these things, and I start to let loose with my counselor. Do you realize what I did to people? People I didn't know. I went out there and did what I was told to do, what I was trained to do, because that was my job. It can be debilitating. And thank you for bringing that up, because it is something the VA doesn't recognize. There's nothing in the DSM or any other clinical works that say, how do you treat someone for moral issues? And I think that's going to be a long struggle, but it's there. And thank you for bringing it up. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What can students without military experience do to make sure that it's easier?
Well, the standard reply always is, once you know you have identified someone who served in the service, everybody always says, well, say thank you for your service. But if you do it, look them in the eye and be sincere about it. Don't turn around and as an offhand comment say, oh, yeah, man, thanks for your service. Because they're going to look at you and not think too much of you. Don't question them about stuff. I always tell people, what do you think is the one question you don't ever, ever ask a veteran? Anybody? Yeah. Because you could trigger a PTSD moment in me. I've tried to get away from using the word trigger, Because when I think about trigger, I think about 5 pounds of pressure on that piece of iron and holding my breath. So I've started to use the word switch more often. So you just don't know. You don't ask those kind of questions. They'll talk to you, but the biggest issue we have in talking to non-military people is trust. If we don't trust you, if we don't feel you're sincere, we're not going to bother with you. And it's the same thing with our counselors. It is very difficult for a combat veteran to go into counseling, to look at a person who's 28 years old with their PhD and they're now a psychologist, and let out and talk to them about what you did in war. Because all they know is what they've learned in books, and maybe when they did some internships or they did their clinical work. Very hard for us. We expose ourselves. We don't like to be exposed. We are taught to improvise, to adapt, to overcome, to persevere, and nothing, absolutely nothing is more important than a mission. And if you get in the way of me accomplishing my mission, I'm going to run you over. So be sincere. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.